Hey guys, it's Gary again, back with part 2 of my John Abercrombie overview. I was intending on doing this a lot sooner, but I kind of got interrupted by Andrew from California, turntablist, sending me 8 wonderful CDs. And I got those on Saturday, and I kind of been off on a listening tangent, pretty much listening to nothing but those 8 CDs that he sent me, and so it kind of delayed me a little bit in getting back to John Abercrombie. I have some Abercrombie stuff playing in the background. I don't know to what extent you'll be able to hear it, but it's literally the first music that I've listened to since Saturday that wasn't from the stuff that Andrew sent me, because that's all I've been listening to. Hopefully you've seen part 1, and probably should watch part 1 before you watch part 2. I had originally thought that I could get through all my John Abercrombie stuff prior to actually entirely in the first video. I couldn't, and I realized that kind of, I don't know, 30 minutes into it or whatever, that it was going to be pretty much impossible. So I had to divide it up into two chunks. The unfortunate thing with that is that in the first one, I did everything that John did as a leader. Not all of his albums, all the ones I have. He's come out with a couple albums that I didn't cover. In 2012, he came out with an album called Within a Song, again on ECM. And that was an album of all covers of 1960s jazz tunes that he kind of grew up with, that were very influential to him. So it wasn't an original album. It was pretty much entirely all covers. And now in 2013, I think this might be his most recent thing, he came out with an album called 39 Steps, again on ECM. And that is now going back to originals, getting back to his band concept. He's still in a quartet mode, but he's dropped the violin of Mark Feldman that he had for years, and has actually gone with back to piano again in his quartet. He's got pianist Mark Copeland. I heard snippets of the album. I'm not going to review it because I haven't heard the whole album. It sounds good. I'm not as much a fan of later day Abercrombie because of his the change in technique on his guitar, when he went to using strictly finger picking and using his thumb versus the plectrum, and the fact that I've kind of moaned about the fact that he kind of pretty much seems to have dropped the acoustic guitar from his arsenal, and that lovely electric mandolin that I think we have to get together, maybe take up a collection and have everybody donate and buy John a new electric mandolin and just send it in his house. I know he lives a couple hours from here in New York State somewhere. Find his address and just send him a new electric mandolin saying, please use this. So his new band is with Mark Copeland on piano in a quartet with bass and drums. Bassist Drew Gress is the bassist that he's using now. And that kind of harkens back to his first working band, the Abercrombie Quartet of the late 70s, early 80s, that made albums like Arcade and M, which had Richie Byrock on piano, which I love. I don't really know you could beat that. I think Mark Copeland's a fine pianist. He's a little more rooted, I think, in mainstream bebop than Richie Byrock was. So that's what Abercrombie's doing now. That album came out, the last album, 39 Steps, with the new quartet, which I believe still has Joey Barron on drums. Pretty sure. That came out in September 2013, the 39 Steps album. So that's something that he's probably, I don't think I've missed, he may have come out, I don't think he's come out with anything since then. So if nothing else, I can be fairly sure that we're going to be seeing something else from him soon. He tends not to let more than a couple years go before doing something as a leader, and I'm probably missing a million things that he's done as a sideman, because you can't keep up with his sideman gigs. I think if that was the only thing, that if he was the only artist that you were into, geez, it would still be hard to keep up with his sideman gigs. And I've got a sampling of those things to show today. And there's another one I wanted to mention because it's another album I don't have. Abercrombie also recorded a bunch of albums as a side people with people like Don Thompson. I don't have that. He actually recorded what sounds like an interesting album, CD, that I don't have, that oddly enough was not for the ECM label. And it was something from 2006. It was on Chesky Records. And it's an interesting kind of sounding album. Again, I've only heard the snippets that are available online, called Structures. In 2006, so that was right coinciding very much with his ESM output. So I don't know how he kind of got this side project in. The only time I'm aware of it is he did that, what was it called now, Jazz Flight or something like that back in '79 that he did away from ECM. That was something that only ever came out on vinyl. But that only came out on vinyl, and that was strictly standards. This album he did called Structures was with Gene Jackson on drums and Eddie Gomez on bass, and it was just a trio. And it sounds that like it's a little bit more closer to a mainstream thing, but not as mainstream as the Straight Flight album, which was strictly really standards. But I believe that a lot of the tunes on the Structures album were covers. I know there's some originals on there, but I think that one's a little bit more of a straight-ahead sounding album. So if you wanted that Straight Flight album, which is pretty near impossible to find, and you wanted to hear John maybe play in a trio, again, because they were both guitar, bass, drums trios, both of those albums, Structures and Straight Flight. If you couldn't get Straight Flight, and you want to hear John playing more of a closer to maybe a little bebop thing, I think that Structures album from 2006 might be up your alley. I haven't got that. I'm gonna pick that up at some time. It's still very, very much in print. If I can get that at a decent price, I think I'm gonna go that route. So that covers a little bit of what John's done that I don't have done since the last stuff. So my last video was pretty much his mainstream, his leader roles albums, and I did cover the Gateway things. I would have held off on the Gateway things had I known I was going to have to divide the video up into two parts. But I did cover Gateway, so if you're watching this thinking, how come you didn't mention Gateway? I did. It's just in the first video. So grab some vinyl. I've talked about some of these before. In the Ralph Towner video. I won't go into too much length, but I got to say how much I love this album. Sargasso Sea, just duets, John Abercrombie, Ralph Towner. I not only put this as one of the best Ralph Towner albums, but I also put it as one of the best John Abercrombie albums. May 1976 for ECM. This is one of those albums I couldn't buy fast enough on compact disc. I just wanted to hear it really clean. Even though my vinyl's in pretty damn good condition, I gotta say. I still have the, but it's a quiet date. There's no drums, there's no noise on it. I love this album. Love this album. Billy made two albums together. John Abercrombie seemed in much later interviews that I've heard with him that he was totally open to doing another one with Ralph Towner. Ralph Towner, for some reason, doesn't seem interested. I don't know why. I mean, they've both gone on to do recordings with guitar trios, oddly enough, in recent years. John did one that wasn't on ECM. Ralph did one that wasn't on ECM. And then the latest guitar trio, I think it was called MGT. I know Wolfgang Muspiel is one of the other guitarists. The latest one is on ECM, but they did one prior with Ralph Towner and Wolfgang Muspiel and the same third guitarist, I believe, for another label. So continuing on, March 1981, Ralph and John got back together. 5 years later, this finally got re-released on CD, just probably within the last year or two. It took forever. People were complaining and moaning that, Sargasso Sea has been available forever on CD. How come this one isn't? And March 81, and I saw them shortly together play. Shortly after this album came out, I saw them play in New York. And John Scofield was watching, no less. So I probably saw them in, I want to say, late 81 or early 82. They were both living in New York City at the time, so it wasn't even like a real traveling gig for them. They probably just went home after the gig. A lot of people, this was March 81, called 5 years later because it was 5 years after the Sargasso Sea album. A lot of people prefer this one over Sargasso Sea. I don't, but I still love it. And the funny thing is now when I play the CD version, I like it enough that I copied it from my turntable into my computer, and I burned a CD of it, and I was been listening to that for years. And I still hear the cracks, and the pops in the vinyl in my mind whenever I play that CD, because I've listened to it so much apparently that the noise on the vinyl surface actually kind of ingrained itself into the songs. So when I play back the CD, I'm hearing these little pops and crackles that aren't really there. It's weird what the mind does. I think the reason that I prefer Sargasso Sea, it's just there's some piano in Sargasso Sea, and I think it's only on 2 tracks, but it breaks things up nicely, having an additional color in there. This is all guitars and only guitars, and it's preference. Maybe it's the material too. There's a couple beautiful tunes on Sargasso Sea, especially the opening tune called Fable, which is 8 minutes and 40 seconds. That is just really hard to beat. It's such a pretty expansive tune. But they're both certainly worth buying. Another getting to John's side things now, side projects, pretty much playing on other people's albums. Here's one that a lot of people are going to know. Enrico Rava with John Abercrombie, great band. Pally Danielson on bass, John Christensen on drums. The Pilgrim and the Stars, my favorite drummer in the world, John Christensen. Did I say that yet? This was recorded. I don't know when it was recorded because it doesn't say. It's got a 75 date on it, so it was either recorded 74 or 75. Interesting. I didn't have this one for the longest time. I mean, it's you can't have everything, and I just put off buying it. And I don't know if it actually ever came out on ECM prior to this issue of it. This is now part of the Touchstone series on ECM, where they're reissuing things at a much lower price that have been out of print for a long time. Now, some of those things were things that have not prior seen CD release, and some of them have seen a much earlier CD release. They then went out of print, and they and were out of print for a number of years, and then they remanufactured them again on CD and kind of put them under the Touchstone series. This is the only one I've ever seen. This is in a slim, like a digipack, like a single pack. This is the only one of these I've ever seen ECM do. They've been doing digipacks for a lot of their Touchstone series and reissues, but they're the regular CD width, the same size as the regular jewel cases. This is the only one I've ever seen, and I don't know, guys, if you're aware that they're using these now, because this is fairly, I think I bought this about a year ago. So this one tends to get lost because it's so thin. It kind of gets lost in the stacks very easy. Nice recording, pretty much what you'd expect. If you know Enrico Rava's got a beautiful tone on trumpet. So John, it's got guitar, bass, and drums as the backing. An interesting album. I like it a lot. I haven't listened to it so much that I could really go into great depth and detail on it. This is a fairly recent purchase for me. I don't recall whether or not this came out on CD at all prior to this issue. If it had, it obviously went out of print. But I'm not sure if this was available on CD or whether this is the first time it came out on CD from the album, from 75. Interesting album. And I want to say I don't have something... I'm missing... I know I'm missing some stuff here because I'm picturing another album cover that John did, and I think it was another Enrico Rava album that I forgot to pull out. Recorded roughly at the same time. And I forgot to pull it out, I guess. Yeah, I don't see it here. Okay, what else do I have? Another kind of co-led project, I guess. This is an interesting one, not on ECM. Who is this on? Eastside? Is this Eastside Digital? Evidence Records. Richie Byrock, a duet. Richie Byrock and John Abercrombie. John's old partner from his quartet days, from the John Abercrombie Quartet that was around from 77 to 80. Richie Byrock, was this from 94? It was released in 94. Not sure when it was recorded, but roughly around there. It didn't sit in the vaults or anything. So this is many years after the Abercrombie Quartet that had Richie Byrock in. Richie Byrock sticks entirely to piano on this, though John plays guitar synthesizer on this. And actually, you know what? I'm gonna. You gotta give me a minute here. I gotta pull out the book because. Yeah, I knew it. It was recorded early in '87 because I want to say by '94 John had ditched the guitar synthesizer. So I guess maybe the '94 date on here might be when it was released on CD. Maybe it wasn't originally released on CD. I don't know. But it was recorded in '87, which was when Abercrombie was in full guitar synth mode. And I don't know why I hesitated buying this so much. I really like it, but it's really avant-garde. And I've spoken to a couple folks that are Abercrombie fans that didn't have it, that then went out and bought it. And I said to them, give me your impressions afterwards. And they're kind of like, it wasn't what I expected. It's not pretty at all. And I mean, and if you remember the Abercrombie Quartet with Richie Byrock in it, Richie did a lot of the writing. A lot of that music you could just describe as really pretty stuff. This is dark. And it's not even so much Richie's. It's a little bit of Richie's playing on piano, but it's mostly, it seems like, the frame of mind that John Abercrombie was in with the guitar synth. So simply going from point of view, it's like, oh, this is going to be pretty, and then hearing this kind of dark, it's almost like, wow, how do I describe it? It's almost if Abercrombie was going to try to do a Steve Roach, but still maintain all his jazziness and everything on the guitar synthesizer, this would probably be like kind of the result of it. It's really dark, and it's not what you expect. And at first I'm like, I don't know if I like it. And I kind of put it on the shelf. But I always remembered that initial impression I had of it. And then when I pulled it down a few years later, knowing what to expect, and I had to give it a bunch of listens. But I really dig it now. I really dig it now, but it's not the place that you go to when you want to hear Abercrombie play pretty or Richie Byrock play pretty, either on their own or together. It's really dark, but I like it. And it's not, the funny thing is that since Abercrombie has ditched the guitar synthesizer, you won't hear him do this kind of music anymore. Not a great introduction to either one of their playing and writing, really. But when you know their styles well, and you're looking for a diversion, for something different, wow, this blows. And I really like this now, but I was so disappointed when I first got it that it ended up sitting on the shelf for a bunch of years. And I guess no secret to a lot of folks. I was a little surprised that John played sideman to Charles Lloyd, though, for ECM for a while. I don't know if this is the only album he did with them. He did tour as well with Charles Lloyd. This is from around 2000, so this is long after the guitar synth is gone. The Water is Wide. This is a Charles Lloyd album. Charles only playing tenor saxophone on this one. Brad Meldau on piano, young piano that's been around a lot lately. John on guitar, Larry Grenadier, I guess it's Grenadier on double bass, and Billy Higgins on drums. And Billy Higgins, was played with Charles quite a bit. So this is a pretty album. In some ways, when you look at this time period, pretty much from the early 90s on to modern times, I'm starting to find that I prefer John playing as a sideman in other people's bands, Though I get the feeling listening to this, I think this is the one I was listening to last week, that ECM is infamous, and I don't know if they still do this. I think they do, for only having, for their jazz albums, not for their classical thing is probably a different world altogether. The jazz albums, they basically only allowed 2 days of recording for those albums and 1 day for mixing. That was how they worked pretty much through the 70s, and I want to say they probably haven't changed that work method. I want to say, though, that on this, this was probably recorded at least in 2 days. I'm guessing I had at least 2 days. But it sounds like Abercrombie was not there for both days, because there's tracks that he's entirely absent from. And he's the only electric instrument on here. So, it's pretty much an acoustic quartet that you hear with piano, saxophone, bass, and drums until John's electric guitar comes in. And he's on, I want to say, maybe less than half the tracks. So I think that there was probably a couple days, 2 or 3 days of recording. And John was probably only there for 1 day, as I'm guessing when I'm listening to this. Still a worthwhile album. Yeah, I think I left behind an Enrico Rava. I can picture I'm pretty sure it's Enrico Rava, and I think it's a date from '77 that Abercrombie also played played guitar on that I missed and I've got here somewhere. No big secret. I showed these. Colin Walcott, his only two solo albums under his own name, not counting the Works compilation. Both of which John Abercrombie played guitar on. So you got Cloud Dance, which a lot of people consider an absolute classic, from 75, I think it is. The date on here is 76. I think it was recorded in 75. Yeah, because I think it was recorded at the same time as the first Gateway album, because here's Colin Walcott on sitar and tabla drums, with Abercrombie on guitar, Dave Holland on bass, and Jack DeJohnette drums. And this was recorded, I'm pretty sure, at the same time as the first Gateway album. So it's basically Gateway with Colin Walcott. Of course, Colin wrote all the music on there, though. And 77, a couple years later, when Colin did his next solo album, Grazing Dreams, which I prefer this album, actually, he brought John back. So he's got John playing, electric and acoustic guitars and the mandolin, the electric mandolin. So I love that because he's got the flavor of that mandolin in here. He's also got Pally Danielson on bass, Don Amramao on percussion, so not a kit drummer. So you got a lot of percussion colors on here, which I think is why I prefer this over Cloud Dance. Sonically, there's more sounds going on. You've got the upright bass. You've got not just a drum kit, which Cloud Dance had Jack DeJohnette playing pretty much just drum kit. You've got Dom Amramao playing all kinds of hand percussion, Brazilian percussion, berimbau, those kind of things I like. And Colin again on sitar and tabla, and the great Don Cherry playing trumpet, wood flute, and stuff like that. So how can you beat, that it's nice hearing Don soloing over that. And of course, right after this album, Colin Walcott formed Cadona along with Don Cherry. So I prefer this to Cloud Dance, just because it's got the a little bit more sonically going on there, a little bit more interesting for me with the colors, plus with the trumpet, and Abercrombie playing the electric mandolin and acoustic guitars as well. Okay. Now, what I'm going to say to stay away from it is probably going to send everybody buying this. I haven't played, maybe I should have played this before, but I just can't bring myself to. Here's an album by the Lonnie Smith Trio, which is Lonnie Smith on organ, John Abercrombie on guitar, and Marvin Smitty Smith on drums. All of those guys, I imagine everybody knows. This is from 94, recorded apparently one day, March 20th, 94. A tribute to Jimi Hendrix. So they play Purple Haze, Up From the Skies, Gypsy Eyes, I don't know that song, The Star Spangled Banner Jimi Hendrix style, Voodoo Child, and there's only 4 songs, 12 minutes, 9 minutes, two 17-minute tracks. So it's a jam session. It's a noisy kind of, you would not guess this is John Abercrombie playing this. Obviously it's a tribute to Jimi Hendrix, so you can imagine what it sounds like. The guitar is kind of distorted, and honestly, I think I played this, if I played it twice, that's being generous. Now I want to play it again just to hear if it's as awful as I remember it to be. But it's kind of, I didn't really expect much out of it. And it's kind of more like, I guess, in the spirit of Jimi Hendrix, because they are taking some of his material, but they're really jamming out on it. But unless you're an Abercrombie completist, I don't really see why you would buy this, because there's other guitarists you can listen to playing in that style if you were into it. And it doesn't really shed much light for me on John Abercrombie, because I know he's capable of doing other types of music. I think that Within a Song album that he recorded a few years ago for ECM probably sheds more of light on where he's coming from, because it entirely contains covers of 60s jazz tunes that John grew up with that were influential to him. That probably sheds more light, than something like this, where he's playing. He knew what he had to do, and I guess when he got the call from Lonnie Smith to record a Jimi Hendrix tribute album, I guess he already knew how he was going to play. So I can't recommend that. Here's another one that I can't recommend, unfortunately, and I really, really wanted to. I got excited when I saw it, and I can't. There's a friggin' recording date on this mess. Can't find the recording date on here to save my life. I can't. There's not even a copyright date on this. This isn't that old. I want to say this is from the 2000-somethings. Wow, they got no copyright date on here whatsoever. Not even on the discs. I want to say this is definitely from the 2000s, early 2000s something. And it's a Mark Egan solo project. And I like a lot of Mark Egan's music. I like a lot of his solo projects. I think the more solo he does, what was it, Beyond Words, I think was his first solo album. It was almost just entirely him. I really dig that. But here's Mark Egan, longtime cohort, Danny Gottlieb on drums, and John Abercrombie on guitar. So it's this kind of the original Pat Metheny group rhythm section with John Abercrombie on guitar. It sounds really good, but it's 2 discs, and honestly, it could have been 1. The tunes are, I think they're pretty much all Mark Egan tunes. I don't recall these being, there's let me see, Mark Egan. There's one cover, one jazz kind of covered. Okay, there's actually 4 tracks. They're short. The 4 shortest tracks on the album are actually credited to all 3 guys, which would mean they're improvisations. The reason I can't recommend it is, sadly enough, because of John. At this point, John had already dropped the acoustic guitar, he dropped the guitar synth, he dropped the mandolin, he dropped using a plectrum on the guitar. And this is kind of at the height of this really tart, trebly sound that he had on his guitar, when he was just using the thumb, and the actual sonic quality of the guitar too has gotten very, very, very thin, actually. I'm not crazy about the sound, and being that this is the upfront instrument here, you've only got guitar, bass, and drums. So it's really, and this is what I pretty much don't like about a lot of the, pretty much from the early 90s on, John Abercrombie's stuff, is he uses the same. The bad thing is there's no variation. Because he dropped the mandolin, he dropped the acoustic guitar, he dropped the guitar synth. The guitar pretty much sounds the same on every track, and it gets to be a little tiring by the time you get to the end of a CD full of it. This is 2 CDs, and they could have really pared this down to 1. I was really excited when I ordered this, but by the time I kind of knew that John was in that mode, he has a guitar sound, and he must have been happy with it at the time, because it doesn't vary from track to track, and this only got a couple plays, and I really paid a lot of money for it when it first came out. So I'm not going really chronologically here. I'm kind of bopping all around. And but I do have plenty of recommendations here. Plenty of recommendations. In 1982, and this is one of the recommendations, guys. In 1982, a drummer, George Marsh, asked John to record an album with him. Just the 2 of them. I already love that concept right away, just a duo. So you got George Marsh on drums, percussion, and thumb piano, or I guess kalimba. And John playing electric guitar, mandolin guitar, and piano. And this is 82, so this is just a little bit prior to the guitar synth, I think. I'm trying to remember now, because I seem to recall there may be some guitar synth on here, because I remember hearing some very processed sounding guitar. The nice thing is that John's got the electric mandolin on here. He's got the electric guitar, and he plays piano, just a little bit, but it's the only album I've ever seen or heard where he plays piano. The album is originally called Drum Strum, came out in 82, and this is on New Albion Records. When it came time to reissue it on CD, the CD has been put out. It's called Upon a Time, an Album of Duets. And instead of just releasing the Drum Strum album, apparently George Marsh, the drummer, had done another duet album with Mel Graves, the bass player. And that's an interesting combo, because it's hard to keep it interesting, a duet album with just bass and drums. And so what they did is they combined the 2, and they don't give enough information about the 2. I believe the Drum Strum album is here in full. It accounts for about 48 minutes on the CD, and that would be, sound like pretty much that would be the limit of a vinyl LP. They probably wouldn't have tried to squeeze more on there. So it's probably got the Drum Strum album in full. What it doesn't have in full, and you may or may not be interested, I am interested in it, was the second album on here, recorded with bassist Mel Graves, because that only accounts for about 20 minutes worth of the material. So they clearly they clearly could not fit the full album on here. And it seems like it appears that they put out the Drumstrum album in full, and the album called Marshland, which was George Marsh and Mel Graves' album. It appears that was recorded about the same time in '82, according to the very minimal liner notes. It seems like they just fit in as much stuff from that album as they could. But the Mel Graves, it's definitely worthwhile. It's not just for the Abercrombie stuff. The duets with Mel Graves I really like, and I really kind of wish that there was a way that they could issue the full session, because obviously 20 minutes is not an album. But Abercrombie, the only time, I think he only plays piano on one track, but you never heard him play piano anywhere else. And it's really nice because it doesn't, they do overdubbing on there, but it doesn't sound like they're attempting to really make it sound like a band. So you've got the interesting sparseness. They really don't try to necessarily fill in the bass roll a lot of times. That's missing from here on the Abercrombie Marsh material. And it's got a bunch of tracks that are credited both to Abercrombie and Marsh, and it's not real clear whether or not they're actual improvisations or not. But there's, I don't know, like 4 or 5. I'm looking at it, I see 5 of the tracks on here. Some tracks that are written entirely by Abercrombie, and some tracks that are written solo by Marsh. But actually, there's probably more Abercrombie tracks on here than there are Marsh tracks on here, if you count the John's originals and the co-writing credits versus the George Marsh originals and his co-writing credits. This is a must-have, and I'm pretty sure it's still in print. New Albion Records, it came out in '89 on CD. The original sessions are from '82. This is one of those albums, if you're an Abercrombie fan, I would say pick up before you did his 90s stuff and his 2000 era stuff. This is better than that stuff, I think. And it's interesting to hear this duo. You know, John doesn't work a whole lot in duos. And when he did, it was like with another guitarist or something like that. So, you know, this is very different than the Richie Bayrock duo or the Ralph Towner duo. But it's really, I love it. You know, maybe a little avant-garde, but not at all in a bad way. I love this album. Definitely one of my top 10 Abercrombie albums, and one I tend to forget about quite a bit. Now, John has, no big secret, long history with playing with this man, Jack DeJohnette. This is my favorite Jack DeJohnette album, and it's Jack's, for a long time, it was really his only solo album. He's done a couple solo synthesizer albums, but apart from that, Jack really hasn't done a solo album with him playing drums and keyboards and numerous overdubs. So February '76, he decides to go in the studio and record a couple albums. The first one is a solo album with just Jack on half of it. It's 6 tracks. Half of it's Jack solo playing piano, mostly, you know, a lot of drums, organ on one track, just piano on one track. But interesting kind of avant-garde, but my favorite DeJohnette album. The other 3 tracks are duets with John Abercrombie, and I love them, absolutely love them. Abercrombie plays electric guitar on 2 tracks, so it's electric guitar and drums on 2 tracks, and acoustic guitar and drums on a 3rd track, which I love because it's almost like a Spanish march. This kind of track that John plays acoustic guitar on. Lovely. It's really nice. And they stayed in the studio February '76 to record Jack's next Directions album called Untitled. And again, with John Abercrombie. And on here is another duet, a very short one, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. That's just John and Jack in the studio. John again on guitar. And an interesting little thing that John would use 20 years down the road. It sounds like he detuned an electric guitar in an attempt to make it sound like an ethnic instrument, specifically probably like an Indian instrument, like with the drone thing, almost like a sitar with a sympathetic drone to it, by detuning it. It's a short 2 minute and 20 second piece, probably recorded exactly at the same time as the other tracks on there, on the Pictures album. But because it's interesting, there's another track that's just, this is a group album, but that one track called Pansori Visions, which is a really wonderful track. One of my favorite Jack DeJohnette albums, again, not on CD yet. And it seems like it's a carryover from Jack's Pictures albums. The rest of the tracks, the other the other 6 tracks are the full band. Alex Foster on saxophones, Mike Richmond on electric and acoustic bass, and Warren Bernhardt on electric piano, clavinet. And then John Abercrombie in the band as well. Next to pictures, I think this could be my favorite Jack album. And I don't know, ECM, February 76, another one they didn't put out. They've not put out on CD yet. Don't know what they're waiting for. That's a really good album. Next album, 77, Jack DeJohnette's Directions, New Rags. I actually have two versions of this. They really took obviously this is a cutout, and this is still sealed. I didn't open this because I actually have a second copy of it. But man, talk about a cutout. What happened to the cutout notch? They used to make that little notch in the corner. They just decided to hack off a nice, looks like somebody took a bite out of it actually. This is a good album, not as good as Untitled, not as good as the prior one. I think there's more jamming on here. There's probably less preparation. The same band, minus Warren Bernhardt on keyboards. Jack is now playing the piano on the album as well as the drums. John Abercrombie playing electric guitar and electric mandolin. Alex Foster again on saxophones. Mike Richmond on bass. I guess one of the few times in Jack's career that the band stayed fairly intact without too much of a personnel change. You did have Warren Bernhardt leave, but the other four guys stayed on board. This is a good album, and this is another one. Still isn't out on CD. Another ECM album. This was recorded in May 1977. I like this one. I think there was a little less written material. I think the Untitled album, the prior one I showed, which, by the way, Jack actually played saxophone on one track on the Untitled album, even though there's Alex Foster, saxophone player in the band. It seems like an Untitled, Jack had a lot of material ready in the studio. With this one, not as much. There's a couple tracks that kind of jam on and seem to be based on very, very little else than just a little head arrangement, and then just like go off in solo. But still, I like the album very much. I think this is one that I recorded onto disc. I think I put it on the old turntable, copied it over to a CDR for myself. But again, these, I'm sure ECM probably has another Jack DeJohnette box set coming out. They did a special edition box set, which is funny because all the special edition stuff had already come out on CD, except for the Inflation Blues album. So they had come out on CD even if they went out of print, and they put together this 4 CD special edition package. But 3 of the CDs had already been out on CD prior, and I have them as individuals, and I very much want to get the Inflation Blues album, but you can only get, I have the vinyl, but it's worn as crap because it's my favorite special edition album. But now I got to buy the whole Jack DeJohnette box set to get the Inflation Blues on CD. So they haven't done anything with his directions or new directions, so I'm wondering if they have a second batch planned, and I hope so because I like that material better. More new directions. John everybody else in the band changed, but John stayed for new directions. A year later, June 1978, so 13 months later, here's John with Jack DeJohnette, the great late Lester Bowie on trumpet, Eddie Gomez on bass. This is a great band. Great band. Another one of Jack's best, I think. I probably put this in his top 5 as well. This is a really fantastic thing. There's 5 tracks, 3 written by DeJohnette, 2 of them are group improvisations, and the group improvisations I really like too. There's not a dud on here. It's got the track Silver Hollow. I would put my top 3 Jack DeJohnette tracks ever. The Gateway 2 album has a track that Jack wrote called Blue with Jack on piano, no drums. That I consider probably his best composition, my favorite one anyway. Silver Hollow is right up there from this album. And there's 2 tracks on his Pictures album. I think it's Pictures 2 and 6, or is it 5 and 6? 5 and 6, Pictures number 5 and 6. Those 4 tracks are my favorite. The Blue from Gateway 2, Silver Hollow, and Pictures 5 and 6, I think, are my 4 favorite Jack DeJohnette tracks. And fantastic, with Lester Bowie on trumpet, it gives a nice little color, no more saxophone in the band. But Lester Bowie gives nice color to the procedure, and it's so well recorded. And there's overdubs on here, so John gets to play some kind of more electronic processing on his electric guitar. on this album, which is nice because it creates a nice wash for the trumpet to play over. But on top of that, John actually plays the electric mandolin as well, which, you know, I'm a sucker for. Actually, just about a year later, exactly a year later, June 1979, they came out with this live album. Same exact band. Now I was surprised because when I first got this, I thought this was a tour to support the album. And usually these bands go into the studio and obviously they record the album. It doesn't come out for months, but you get to see the band live before the album comes out because they do a tour. A lot of times they're playing together, preparing to make an album, and they go on tour, and then, like, you know, 8 months or a year later, you see an album come out. In this case, it was kind of the opposite. They actually went into the studio, and a whole year later, they went and did a tour. And it's usually, you know, jazz musicians are usually not available. You know, like, I'm surprised, like, there's no change in personnel on this. You got Lester Bowie on here, obviously, from the Art Ensemble of Chicago, that was very busy at this time. You got John on guitar and electric mandolin, Eddie Gomez on bass, and Jack on drums, and he plays piano on one track. They do one or two tracks. Let me see. Is it Biofeeder on here? Yeah, they do 2 tracks from the prior album, from the New Directions album. But two of the longer tracks are new tracks. But I wouldn't highly recommend this. It's more for completists like me, simply because it's kind of raw. And there's times that John's playing the electric mandolin, which I love, but the thing that's missing is there's no harmonic chordal instrument under it. Whereas in the studio, on the prior studio album, John would play guitar, play a bunch of chords on guitar, if he was going to play the mandolin on top of it. So you have that nice covering. See, here, when he's playing the mandolin, there's really nothing behind him besides the bass and the drums. So that whole mid-range is missing, because you got Lester Bowie just on trumpet, but obviously he's laying out for a lot of the time when soloing is going on. So you're kind of missing that layer of that mid layer where, like, a piano and a guitar, the chordal instruments would be, are missing from here. Interesting picture, though, because the picture that they chose on here is, it looks like John's playing this teeny tiny guitar. It looks like he's playing a little tiny Stratocaster, but that is his electric mandolin. And you can see how small the body is. Hopefully you can see that from the picture there. You can see how intensely tiny the body is there of the guitar, or the mandolin. But that's his electric mandolin. And it looks funny because it looks like he's playing this teeny tiny guitar. Still an album that I listen to, though. It's just, it's a bit raw because it's a live recording. And it's missing that, obviously, the ECM aesthetic because of his live recording. And also, you know, that when John's playing the mandolin, he's only playing single lines on it, not chords. So you're kind of missing that nice full sound that the band has in the studio. Here's another date that is not a typical date in a lot of ways. Bobby Hutcherson, Un Poco Loco. Weird album cover. Looks more like a kid's album, you know, cover. This is unusual in a lot of ways because Bobby Hutcherson is kind of an avant-gardist, and this is probably amongst the closest he ever came to a commercial sound. It's a very slick-sounding late 70s album. This was recorded in, well, they don't have a recording date on here. Came out in 80, so I want to say it was recorded probably in 79. Yeah, there's no information on it. But I love this album, and I bought it for a couple of reasons, because John's on it. I love Bobby Hutcherson. I've never heard Bobby Hutcherson play in a more slick context. Now, this is definitely the days before smooth jazz, but you did have guys like David Sanborn that were kind of mining a much more commercial vibe at this time in the jazz world. So there was kind of a slickness going on. But it's interesting in Bobby Hutcherson, whom I love, in his discography. It's interesting in John's discography, too, because this is a lot slicker than anything that John's played on in the past. And the band are no slouches. Bobby Hutcherson vibes and marimba. John plays acoustic and electric guitars. George Cable's on electric and acoustic piano. George Cable's was a guy that we played with a lot of more mainstream guys. Really great piano. You don't hear him too often on electric piano. Chuck DeMonico on electric and acoustic basses. Again, Chuck is somebody that I'm pretty much aware of playing acoustic bass, so it's odd to hear him play electric as well. It's a very electric recording. electric instrumentation, and Pete Erskine on drums. Great band. But when you see those names, you don't necessarily think slick jazz, and this is very slick. There's certainly nothing avant-garde about it. And I liked it enough that I went to great lengths to attempt to get this on CD. It came out, because this is on Columbia. You know, Columbia, if it doesn't sell 100,000 copies, they're not going to keep it in print. And I missed the CD release of it. And I believe it's the first used CD I ever bought because I couldn't find a new copy, not even at a ridiculous price, and I just had to have it. I've always avoided buying used stuff. I've just got this kind of phobia about it. I don't know why. But I broke down because it looked like it wasn't going to come out. Columbia's probably not going to reissue it on CD. The vinyl's pretty worn. You know, I played it a lot. I do like this album. And I bit the bullet and I bought it from, you know, some individual guy selling it. And I was, you know, really surprised because the CD was in excellent condition, even the booklet and everything that came with it. So I was glad to that I kind of bit the bullet and went for the used CD. The material is really nice. Un Poco Loco is a track that everybody's covered. Interesting thing is, I almost wanted to say that I think in a way that Bobby might have wanted Jack DeJohnette on here because they do Silver Hollow, that Jack song. That Jack song, that one that I love, that's one of his top 4 tracks from this album. They actually do a version of Silver Hollow. And this is only somewhere between a year and 2 years after the original version came out. So it's a great track, and when I saw that John was on here, the rest of the band, George Cables is fantastic too, piano player. When I saw that, oh god, I gotta turn that down, hold on guys. Don't you love the way, like, you know, the volume jumps from one CD to the other sometimes, it's just incredible. I had to have this, you know, when I saw who played on it anyway, but the fact that it has one of my favorite Jack DeJohnette songs on here in Silver Hollow, and it's a pretty version, they do a pretty version of it, and John plays acoustic guitar on it too. I'm not sure who writes the other material. I want to say, you know, it's Bobby, but let's see. Oh, George Cables writes one song, Ivory Coast, so that would be, I guess that's a jazz cover, like a standard. George Cables writes Ebony Moonbeams as well. Bobby Hutcherson writes one track. Bobby Hutcherson only wrote one track on this album. Un Poco Loco's Bud Powell track, Silver Hollow by Jack, and the Sailor song, which looks to be a another written by a group of people, so like a jazz standard thing. So George Cables actually writes 2 tracks on here. And there's two covers, and only one Bobby Hutcherson original, which is a little surprising. But this is a good album, not necessarily if you're a fan of, which I am, of Bobby Hutcherson's avant-garde stuff, but if you could appreciate the slicker stuff without it being, it's not that kind of smooth jazz R&B kind of stuff that smooth jazz turned into in the 90s, but it's slick, and it's a weird, you know, to hear Bobby Hutcherson, or most of these guys, play in this context. You know, Pete Erskine played with Weather Report, so he played in the more electric, slicker thing. But Chuck DeMonico, George Cables, John Abercrombie, they're playing in this very, very well recorded, but very, very slick, very electric setting. I still recommend this if you can get a hold of it. I haven't checked to see how the used copy market is for this. I would say there's probably not much of a chance that Columbia would reissue it. A few more to go. Holy crap, I can't believe how long I'm going here. Here's one of my favorite Jan Garbarek albums. The only one recorded with John Abercrombie. This is a fantastic gathering of musicians, and it's very unlike him. You would think that if now Jan's played with Bill Connors and you know, lots of David Torn, lots of interesting ECM-oriented guitarists. So maybe it was natural that John would record an album with him, as this one was done in December 1980. But instead of asking John to be a part of a quartet or a quintet, like David Torn was or Bill Connors was, he decided to go off in a different direction, and he has John playing on here along with Nana Vasconcelos, which is great because there's no kit drums. There's just all the interesting berimbau and hand percussion and things like that going on. And you've got Jan playing tenor and soprano saxes, and he plays some flutes on here. Not nearly enough for me, but one of the best tracks, oddly enough, that is really a pretty thing, is just a duet with Nana Vasconcelos and Jan playing flutes. And Nana Vasconcelos is just banging out a rhythm on these, like these bells, these shimmering bells. It's really a pretty nice track. And Nana you always hear Nana's voice in any recording that he's ever done. His voice is going to pop up somewhere, and it does on this album. But it really works. But it's interesting because you don't really have a drummer. You have a hand percussionist. You've got Jan playing the saxophones and in a couple cases flute, and you've got John doing everything else. And John, just prior to getting the guitar synthesizer, was very much experimenting with otherworldly sounds on his very processed electric guitar. And there's a couple tracks here that have stuff that he may have continued doing if he hadn't stumbled across the guitar synthesizer. So I don't know how he got these sounds out of electric guitar, but he does a drone on one track that lays this nice drone down for Nana Vasconcelos on percussion and Jan Garbarik's playing on saxophones, and then he plays over the drone. So there's definitely a lot of overdubbing. Nana also does a lot of percussion overdubbing. But John plays in an electronic way that I really can't recall prior to using the guitar synthesizer him ever using something this processed sounding. He also, on one track, very interesting, it's the only example of him playing it, he plays an electric 12-string guitar, which when you hear him play it, it's like, ah, man, I wish he would have done more of that. He probably rented it, I'm guessing, because he wouldn't have owned an electric 12-string and only used it for one track on one album. So it was probably something that was either in the studio or rented for the day or something. But I would say, if you like John at all, and if you like Nana Vasconcelos, and you want to hear him in a kind of different context, because Nana plays a lot, primarily in acoustic context with acoustic musicians. And even if you only like Jan a little bit, and I have a lot of times when I just can't take Jan's playing, I have to be honest, and yet I have dozens of albums by him. And this is the reason why, because he creates these musical palettes that are just irresistible. This is fantastic. I mean, and this is it's certainly not like anything John recorded. It's unlike, it has elements of other Jan Garbarek albums, but not a specific album. There's, like a piece from what Jan did a bit later on with getting into more of a world music vibe like he did in the 90s. But because of the lineup of the sparse percussion and no drum kit, and John playing in a very electronic mode. Man, I mean, especially if you like the Animato album, not that it's like the Animato album, which was a trio album with Vince Mendoza on synthesizers and John on guitar, and John Christensen on drums on that one. If you like that context, this is more like a more stretched out version of that. There's some really long tracks on here which I really dig. 9 minutes, 8.5 minutes, 11.5 minutes, 9 minutes. And even the shorter tracks are worthwhile. This could be one of those Jan Garbarek albums that I could actually put on when I'm not in the mood to hear Jan Garbarek and still really dig it. I love this album. I want to say I just flashed back because I want to say I think Chris Cole may have just actually found a copy of this recently. I'm not sure, but I think Chris Cole found a copy of this one. And if there was a Jan Garbarek album Chris was going to like, this would probably be it because of John Abercrombie's playing. And I just like that ethnic percussion thing. I like the hand percussion that Nana plays on this versus the sound of a drum kit, which you got to hear a lot of in Jan Garbarek's group. So this is one that stands out as kind of a little bit different in Jan's discography. Man, I dig this album. I dig this album so much. Naturally, I have it on CD too. And I have 3 more. This is ridiculous. I've got a few artists left, and only a few that I have this extensive a discography by. So, hopefully you won't have any more hour-long videos from me, but I'm not going to say that right now. I got some more stuff that John did as a side project, and I want to say pretty much, if not all 3 of these, at least 2 of the 3 are definitely worth picking up. I came across all 3 of these completely and totally by accident. Tower Records, when they were still around, when the physical stores were around, also had an online presence, which not too many people knew about. They didn't do a good job of advertising it. And I was both going to the stores and looking online, because at the time they had a clearance section, which you could go on the online at Tower Records and look for clearance stuff by genre. So you would accidentally come across lots. So I could go in jazz and look just for bargain clearance stuff. And this is how I found at least 2, if not all 3 of these albums, totally by accident, because I didn't know they existed. And, I got them for, probably less than $10 each. They weren't incredible bargains, but they were new CDs. And the thing is, you didn't have to look up the individual artist, because all 3 of these are John Abercrombie side projects by artists that I'm not overly familiar with. I knew they existed, but I probably wouldn't be looking through their individual CDs or albums to find these. And I believe that's how I found them, is I went to the clearance jazz section, and anything that looked interesting, I would click on and read a description of. And this is actually how I got a lot of stuff, which is one of the reasons why I'm so sorry to see them go, to see Tower Records go. One day, digital recording, April 11th, 1989. John Dirth, the trumpet player, and again, I would have never looked for this album, recorded this album. In one day, April 11th, 1989, John Dirth trumpet, Howard Curtis on drums, the great Mark Johnson on bass, was part of, I guess this would have been roughly around the time of John Abercrombie's trio with Mark Johnson on bass, and John on guitar and guitar synthesizer. This is 87. This is full-on guitar synthesizer mode for John. It's an interesting grouping because you've got bass, drums, trumpet, and guitar. So it could sound like a very mainstream thing. And in fact, a bunch of the tracks sound like they could be a mainstream jazz quartet, trumpet, guitar, upright bass, and drums, except for the fact that John uses so much guitar synth on here. Not on all tracks, but he uses a lot of guitar synth on here, that it really kind of makes it something else. And even when he's not using the guitar synth, he's using the electric guitar, not in the mainstream bebop kind of way. And if he did, the session would come probably fairly close at times to a bebop session, or at least a fairly free bebop session. But it doesn't. And a large part of that is because John uses a lot of guitar synth, so it's a real interesting group. Now there's Secret Love, which is a jazz standard on here, but all the compositions are by John Dirth, the trumpet player, who I'm only slightly familiar with. He's a fine trumpet player, judging from this recording. This is a real interesting recording, and real with Mark Johnson and John Abercrombie. It's interesting, and again, John doesn't do a lot of things with trumpet, especially not a full album, and it's incredible. The whole album is short; it's about 36 minutes. But it's all recorded in one day, April 11th, 89. So John was in full guitar synth mode. His electric guitar is also kind of heavily processed in this, ever so slightly distorted when he doesn't use a guitar synthesizer. Reminds me a little bit of John Scofield in his early days before he played with Miles Davis. Scofield was using a very, like in the Shinola, if you know the Shinola album, that era of a Scofield, he used a very clean guitar sound with just the slightest hint of distortion. And as does John here on this album when he's not using the guitar synth, but there's a lot of guitar synth on here, and it makes it a very interesting album, because John Dirth, is, you could see him going in a very mainstream, almost bebop-ish kind of playing style. He also plays the muted trumpet as well, but it's interesting. You don't see too many. I know the Open Land album did have some trumpet on from John Abercrombie, which is my favorite Abercrombie album probably from the last 20 years. But that was just more of a guest appearance here and there. But this, Mark Johnson, Howard Curtis, drummer, I'm not familiar with. Abercrombie on John Dirth. This is one of those things, I file this on my John Abercrombie albums, by the way. Interesting album. Nice one to get as a, if you could get it at a budget price. Now, this is interesting. Here's another album John recorded as a sideman. And this is, again, another recording done in one day. November 24th, 1987, in New York. He records an album with pretty much jazz giants. Jeff Palmer on organ. Prior to this, I had only seen Jeff Palmer's name. I hadn't heard him. Dave Liebman, saxophone. John Abercrombie on guitars and guitar synth, heavy on guitar synth on this. And Adam Nussbaum on drums. And this is a real interesting album. It's incredible. They recorded this in one day, and yet it's a 60-minute album. So it must be essentially live. It's very well recorded, very slick in terms of the recording quality, sounding recording. So you would never, it doesn't sound like a live recording, but considering they only recorded it in one day and it's 60 full minutes of material, I tend to think that there probably aren't any overdubs. So you've got Jeff Palmer playing the Hammond organ and bass pedals. It's interesting here because it says John Abercrombie, guitar synthesizer. It doesn't even mention guitar. That's how much guitar synthesizer he plays on this album. Though I'm fairly sure you do hear some fairly clean electric guitar in there at times, and Adam Nussbaum on drums. Most of the material is written by Jeff Palmer. Interestingly enough, there are 3 tracks written by the other guys in the band. Each guy in the band gets one very short track to themselves. So the Adam Nussbaum track is called Mr. Adam. The John Abercrombie original track is called Mr. John. So you can guess what the Dave Liebman solo track is, or the track that was written by him is called Mr. Dave. And then all the other tracks, there's 6 other tracks? Yeah, 6 other tracks, 9 total, that are all written by Jeff Palmer. When the album opens, it sounds very much like it could be a mainstream, fairly high energy, but still blues oriented in the way that like Tony Williams' Emergency was still kind of like, it was fusion, but it was like bluesy fusion a lot of the times. And I was kind of hoping that the album wouldn't stay in that mode, because like I said, I love Hammond organ, but when it comes to the jazz world, it seems like everything you hear is always that old blues-based stuff. And I would love to hear something outside of that world. And when the album started, it kind of started like an up-tempo fusion-y, but still a bluesy thing. And yet, like pretty much right after the first track, it completely goes in other directions. And there's times when the organ is even like laying out a great deal. There's a lot of Abercrombie on here, a lot of Abercrombie, a lot of guitar synth. So I'd highly recommend this. And the first track, and there might be one other track later on in the album, that's again more of that bluesy jazz Hammond organ thing, but in between there's electronic stuff. John's little short solo track, Mr. John, which is 4:41, so it's not a short track, is pretty much a very electronic guitar synth thing. I really like this album, and this again is, I stumbled across this somehow. I want to say it might have been in the Tower Records thing, but I might have actually physically seen it in a store. But this is a good one to have. It's like I said, if you like that era of John's guitar synth stuff, this is one to really, really seek out. It's a Soul Note. Soul Note's one of those labels. It's an Italian label. Are they? I don't know if they're still around. There's so many that disappeared that I love so much. I'm sorry to see them go. And here's number 1. If you got nothing else, almost nothing else by John as a sideman, and you like his guitar synth period, this one I know I got from the Tower batch. You gotta get this. Oh my god, what a friggin' fantastic record. This was recorded, well, first of all, let me say it's Ron McClure. Now, Ron McClure is not a bass player that's really well known in the jazz world. He started off in the jazz world, but I think what he did is he went into the studios, because I want to say for a lot of years, I don't know if he was the musical director or he just played a lot on the studio albums by people like the Pointer Sisters, I want to say. I had read his bio a long time ago and wondering why I hadn't heard so much of him. But it seems like he was pretty much a studio-bound musician and playing with a lot of people that our circle doesn't really listen to very much, like the Pointer Sisters and stuff like that. I want to say Ron McClure I saw play live totally by accident once. John Scofield had just put out the Shinola album early in the 80s, I think it was. And that was an album with Steve Swallow and on bass and Adam Nussbaum on drums. And he went and did a tour promoting the album. And Steve Swallow was supposed to be the bassist. And they were playing locally in New Jersey, and I went with a buddy of mine to see them play live. And Steve wasn't there. We went primarily to see Steve. And Steve wasn't there. Ron McClure was filling in. So instead of electric bass, we got upright bass. I'm like, oh, fantastic. Upright. Okay, Steve's not there. I'm not, I'm still going to watch Adam Nussbaum and, John Schofield and Ron McClure. And Ron McClure turned out to be a really sweet guy. I got to speak to him between sets. It was basically they would do a 45-minute set that was 3 tunes. It was like every tune was like 15 minutes long. Second set, every tune was 15 minutes long. Third set, every tune was 15 minutes long. A lot of jamming. And after the first set, I asked Ron McClure, because he had the bow in the bass. You could see it there. He hadn't used it. I said, do you have any plans on using the bow, during the course of the night? Because they all got really long solos. And he said, oh, you want me to use the bow? Oh, okay. So the very first tune on the second set, Ron McClure, the first time he got to play a bass solo, he pulls out the bow and he plays a 10-minute bass solo with accompaniment using the bow. Just like that. So really, really sweet. Actually, they're all nice guys. And I didn't really, after that, really look so much around. I didn't really see a lot of Ron McClure stuff. And yet, I came across this album recorded in July 1989. So John was still in guitar synth mode at this time. And it's an album of all original Ron McClure compositions. The album is called Yesterday's Tomorrow. And it's on a label... It looks like it's out of France because everything here is in French. European Music Productions. It looks like the Region is the name of the label, or Langua Russe. I can't even pronounce some of the writing on here. So it's either on Region Records, EPC, European Music Productions. That looks like it might be the label. I mean, this definitely came out here. This is I didn't think this was an import. I think this was, a domestic release from an import label. Came out in '91, and holy crap, is this a fantastic album! If you can find this, and I've had this for a lot of years, and you like John's synth playing at all. Because now, it really sounds like a John Abercrombie album from this period, but like a really good John Abercrombie album from the late 80s. Now, Ron McClure wrote all the tracks, but because the entire musical group here is bass, drums, and guitar, obviously it's the guitar that's up front. So that's what you hear as the primary instrument. So there's overdubbing. So John's laying down a nice chordal bed using guitar synth, and then he's writing and playing solos over it. And there's a couple times when he actually even uses a sound similar to the Pat Metheny. When Pat Metheny first started using the guitar synthesizer on Off Ramp and Travels, and in that period, he used that very familiar setting to solo on. There's a sound almost identical to that on here. And also, one of these prior albums, too, John plays guitar synth on both these. One of these albums, too, he also uses that same sound, that very close to the Pat Metheny guitar synthesizer sound. But it's different because there's no keyboards here, so it's almost like you get to hear like a very Pat Metheny-ish sound without the keyboards backing him up, which he did do a little bit on solo albums without Lyle Mays, but the writing is really good. John's, the playing of Ron McClure as a bassist is really good. Adam Nussbaum on drums. I'm sorry, Aldo Romano on drums. The guy I'm not familiar with. Aldo Romano, just playing kit drums. And I think it's probably the only album I have by him. And Ron McClure on bass, and John's playing everything else. John definitely does guitar synth overdubbing on this, a lot of overdubbing. And he uses tones. There's a couple times early when he got a guitar synth that a couple of tones were a little bit over the top for me. But it seems like that was the first year or two that he had the guitar synth. And after the first couple of years, he learned how to tone it down a little bit and use things that were softer, maybe less harsh sounding on the guitar synth. And on this is, I mean, you know, you listen to this, you would really think this is a John Abercrombie trio. Very, very much in the mode of, imagine a really good John Abercrombie guitar trio with Peter Erskine and Mark Johnson. That's what it sounds like. Another really good album, like by those three guys. In fact, it's probably better than some of their albums, I think, that he made with Mark Johnson and Pete Erskine. So this is a must-have. If you don't have a lot of stuff, and John's got a lot of solo albums, and you're probably not going to pick up maybe a lot of things by him as a sideman, this is incredible. Even though all the tracks are written by Ron McClure, it sounds like a John Abercrombie album, and a really, really good one. I hope this is still out there and available, because that's one of the highest recommended albums of the non-ECM albums, because I really say, you know, the Jan Garbarek Adventure album is really something to pick up on, as well as the Jack DeJohnette New Directions albums, but most of those haven't come out on CD yet. So, woo! Okay, guys, this is ridiculous. An hour and 11 minutes. All right. Sorry it took so long to get to part 2. I've just been digging on the VCLT that Andrew sent me so much that it took me longer to get back to doing the rest of John Abercrombie. So, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you're all having a great week. And, I'll be back much sooner than you probably want to see me. So I'll see you soon. Bye.